Welcome back, guys. Have you ever had that moment where you started a video for your channel and realized that you actually have your camera set on photograph? So yeah, I talked for about 5 minutes with my camera on only and not my video. So not one of my best moments. So I guess the best part about that is I can be more concise and not worry about things I thought was being a little lengthy on initially. So I can be right to the point. So I'm going to start with the mail data here, but I'm also going to be doing a little bit of a video today that was inspired by two recent posts. One being from Ballpark Memories, who posted yesterday a video about collecting in the vintage era and just sort of some common misconceptions around whether they're investments and that they're stable or not, and just what true scarcity is. And then also a recent podcast by Mike Moynihan on the Golden Age of Cardboard. I'm going to put both links into my description so you can have a chance to look at them for yourself. Mike's podcast was about the Topps rookie cards from the vintage card era, from the Golden Age card era, which was 51 through 80, the way he defined it. And just was able to kind of talk about the fluctuations in prices from one year to another, which are very much tied to the economy and tied to obviously people getting in and out of the hobby, some of which are in there trying to be able to flip things, invest things, and just kind of talked about, sort of the truths around cards as investments versus just something we do for kind of fun. Definitely they could be investments in my opinion, but it's certainly not the same as like investing in a company where you get dividends. But, let you make your own opinion on that, but I think both are great resources, and I have a little video that's inspired by both listening to that podcast and also watching that video recently. But I wanted to start with a mail day. Started recently, I got another Topps Living card of another Chelsea player. This is Mudryk. He is, I think, likely the player that the owner went into the locker room last weekend after the game and said, "You guys are an embarrassment the way you're playing, especially after the investments we put in here." And just so you know, this Todd Boehly is actually part-time owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers too, so he's definitely has some experience owning a team, but not experience owning a team in the Premier League. And I think there was this approach by whoever was running the team under his leadership. Let's just buy all these young players and they're just going to be able to gel overnight with these veteran players, and it's been anything but. This has been the worst season I've ever watched with Chelsea since I've become a fan. Anyway, the owner came down and chastised the team in the locker room after the game last week and was really targeting a high price acquisition that he said is complete bust. I think it might have been him, but I'm not sure. But I don't think it's very fair because the team needs some leadership. The team needs some direction on what the hell they're doing. That's for another podcast for another time. Anyway, let's kind of go into other stuff I picked up for mail day. These are all going to be 2001 Topps Gold cards. So I got Paul O'Neill, another Yankee. This was his final card because he retired at the end of that season. Torrey Hunter, guy who tormented my White Sox as a Twin. This is the second to last active Hall of Famer that I need for the set. Tony La Russa. The last one I need is Chipper Jones, unless you include a lot of the highlight cards and retrospective cards that include like Ricky Henderson and other players like that. I still need more than that, but got Roy Oswalt again. This is actually his card within the base set, not the update traded set. All these guys actually ended up pitching in the major leagues, but Roy Oswalt obviously had a hell of a career. And then finally, Andruw Jones. This is actually a highlight card talking about his time in 1996, where he burst on the scene and hit a bunch of home runs when the Braves destroyed the Yankees in the first two games of that World Series, but went on to actually lose. And Andruw Jones was like the big name at that time, with also Jermaine Dye was the other big young player that were joining that core group of players. Both turned out to be really good major leaguers, and Andruw Jones obviously might be a Hall of Famer at some point. So anyway, I picked him up. And the final one I got, speaking of the Yankees, this is actually not a 2001 Topps card, but it's a 2001 Topps inspired card. If you recall, after Mickey Mantle died, I believe it was in 1997, they released a series of Mickey Mantle cards to just kind of commemorate his place in the hobby, if you will, and also to kind of retire his number because they didn't produce a number 7 card in their set thereafter until 2006, when they were able to get the rights back to Mickey Mantle and reintroduced Mickey Mantle into their products. And so for the years that were missed where they didn't have a number 7 card, they issued a Mickey Mantle card inspired by that year's design for every set. So they had like a base card with it, which matched the design, but then they also had the gold parallels and also, I believe, the black parallels for those. So I recently picked up the gold parallel of Mickey Mantle to go with my whole 2001 Topps Gold run, even though it's not a 2001 Topps card, and you can clearly see the difference because the card stocks are completely different. That doesn't have like the gold foil design that's really delicate and is sensitive to being chipped and creased. This one actually is more of the traditional gold stock thereafter that you saw throughout the rest of the decade and into the early part of the next decade. These are more sensitive to just kind of like having chipping at the tips, just like any other card during that era. So this one actually has a different number, serial number 2, so it's not out of 2001. It's actually out of 577. So it's a little bit more scarce. It's a pretty cool looking card. I already had the green one, which went to my base set. So now I got Mickey Mantle to go in with all the other ones, which I'm pretty excited about. All right, so the video I wanted to do today is I picked 5 cards out of my collection, and it was 4 vintage, 1 not vintage. And I just wanted to kind of talk about, there's scarcity. When talking about investing in vintage cards, you want to kind of look for, obviously, big names, big sets, and also scarcity. But sometimes that doesn't like tell you everything you need to know about it. So I wanted to kind of go through these things and show you 5 cards. And I show you, like, also talk about, then rank them from what are the most scarce, and then also kind of go with the ranking from what's most valuable, just to kind of show you how it's really kind of hard to sometimes read the vintage market, and also sometimes even how a modern card can sometimes how it kind of fits in as far as when you like reflect on vintage card prices versus a modern card. So I'm going to start with, let's start with the oldest. We're going to do that and we'll kind of go forward into the future here. So this one is, I've shown it before. It's been a long time since I've shown this card, but this is a card from 1911. The Mecca doubles folders of specifically Ed Walsh, but there's another player on the back, but this is the Hall of Famer on there, the Hall of Fame pitcher for the White Sox. Obviously the pitcher has the lowest career ERA, if you ever wanted to look that up. So that's Ed Walsh. That's one of the cards. Next one being a 1934 Chick Haffey that I picked up last year. 1934 Gowdy. It's a PSA 3. The Walsh was a PSA 5. One I got recently was from a Diamond Star set. It was a PSA 6 of Rick Farrell, Hall of Fame catcher. The non-Hall of Famer I have in here is from the 1967 Topps set. It's Rocky Colavito, a PSA 5. And then the other one I got was, you've seen this before, was the Albert Pujols rookie gold card from 2001, and it's a PSA 6, and it's numbered out of 2001. All right, so when you're kind of looking at the grades, think for a minute, which card do you think would be like maybe the most scarce by the PSA Pop report? Obviously, the Pujols card tells you just how many there are, period. But like now we're going to take into account how many have actually been submitted for grading through PSA. I only looked up PSA just because they're all PSA number 1. But they're also, you can look at SGC and other grading companies because the Pujols obviously has gone to all of them and probably some of these other cards as well. So I wanted to kind of jump in here. I wanted to kind of rank them from most populous to most scarce. And I'll start with like how many there are of that particular grade, and then how many there might be higher. So we're actually going to start with the one that actually has the most is the Rocky Colavito. And sometimes people think this card is actually a little bit more scarce than it is. But the 1967 Topps High Series is a difficult series to be able to complete, and he's actually part of the High Series, which actually inflates his price because he's actually not a Hall of Famer. He's a star from that era, but not a Hall of Famer. But because he's part of the High Series, which are short printed, many of those are actually super short printed, it actually has a lot more value with it. So the Colavito, there is 95 of these have come out as a 5, and 610 are higher. So keep that in mind. We're kind of thinking about which ones are probably the most valuable. And now we're moving on to the next one that has the most. That would be the Albert Pujols. So there's 10 of them that came in as a 6. Ideally, you'd want a higher grade card of this one if you could. And there are 284 higher. And keep in mind, there's a lot of these on eBay where you can pick them up at any given time. Same thing with Colavito. You can find PSA graded cards of Colavito right around a 5 grade, which is something also a little bit different of more modern issued cards. And I even consider like even sometimes in the 60s stuff being a little bit more readily available, 60s and 70s, than you will in these last 3. All right, so now we'll go with the Chick Haffey. Actually is the next most populous card as far as the PSA Pop Report. This doesn't mean they necessarily made more than the ones I've actually showed you, but these are the ones that have actually been submitted to PSA. The 34 Goudey set is a very highly coveted set. So it's going to be a set where people are submitting a lot of things in for grading. In the 3 condition, the Haffey, there are 43 others, and there's 225 cards higher. So now you can see we're starting to get into some like scarcity here. This is actually a card that's not so common to find in a PSA holder number 1, but also if you're trying to find a higher grade, there's only going to be 225 higher than these. So that's where it's like that's kind of like, okay, now we're getting to something that's maybe a little bit more scarce. All right, and then our next one would be actually the Rick Farrell, which is actually one of the higher graded cards of this group here. It's also a PSA 6. It's from 1935. Obviously a Hall of Fame catcher, not a huge superstar of that era. His pop report is 74 in this current condition, and there's 128 higher. So now we're getting into like some pretty scarce cards kind of here. Obviously now there's less than, or just over 200 cards of this grade or higher. We'd be able to pick that up. And now we got the Ed Walsh. There are 61 of these at a 5, but there's only 57 higher. All right, so now I want you to think for a minute and kind of think about which are the ones that are going to be the most valuable. If you're kind of just thinking about scarcity, you're like, okay, well, they're all Hall of Famers, right? But are all Hall of Famers equal? I would say probably not. Some Hall of Famers are going to be much more highly coveted. Like the 52 Mantle, is definitely a scarce card, but I think there's probably more of them in some of these grades than probably like maybe the Haffey or the Farrell or even the Walsh. But it's Mickey Mantle's 52 Topps card, which is like obviously an industry standard for high-end collectors to be able to put that into their collection. So that makes a difference, obviously, in the demand. The demand is going to influence, despite even the pop report, how these things kind of pan out. But if you have a high card that's in demand and the pop is low, obviously we know things could look very, very different. Just think of the Honest Wagner card from the T206 set. All right, so I hope you guys kind of thought about those 5 and, I'll kind of go by value. Which ones are going to be highest to lowest? If you had thought the 5th highest one was going to be the Rocky Colavito, you're going to be right. The Rocky Colavito, despite not being a Hall of Famer, is a card that is still about a $200 card. I paid maybe just a little bit under it, but because it's a high series card from that set, which is the 1967 Topps set, as far as like 60 sets collectors, I think the 67 is the one people chase after much more than they do any other set in that era because of the high series that they're trying to finish that set. Granted, there's definitely there's great, beautiful sets from that era too that you can collect. I think 1960 probably can make a good argument, but there's nothing as short printed as the 67 high series, especially the double printed cards. So again, Colavito, not a huge star. I guess you could say he's a Hall of Famer, but not a huge Hall of Famer, but he's not a Hall of Famer, but he's a huge star in that era. But because he falls in that high series, really pushed up his number, obviously, and the value of this card. So still, that's only the 5th highest. So now you're kind of wondering, of the last 4, it's got to be probably one of these vintage cards, right? Because they're really, really scarce. Okay, well, let's think about that. The next one that was on my list here, as far as the most valuable, was oh my goodness, I've kind of blanked on it a little bit here, but it is actually the Ed Walsh. I had to get that ordered right. So the Ed Walsh hasn't moved as far as like on the pop report, as far as like prices realized on PSA, and there hasn't been ones on eBay, I think, since I purchased this card. So this is what I purchased a couple of years ago, and it's like right around 250 as far as like its value, and it's actually the most scarce card that I'm showing you today. But it's not a highly coveted set. You know, that's a big part, and it's also not a highly coveted Hall of Famer. If you get Christy Mathewson, or if you try and go after Ty Cobb from this set, you're going to pay a very different price, even though they're not necessarily the most popular set design. But because you're going after those guys, it makes a huge difference. So anyway, he was number 4. Number 3 on this list was the Rick Farrell card. Yeah, a PSA 6 from 1934 is not going to be as much as the card that I'm going to show you next, which kind of blows my mind. The Diamond Stars, for as lovely as they are, and I love them, are not as popular as the 33 and 34 Goudeys. And it's never more evident than looking at this card in particular in comparison to the one I'm going to show you. So this one, I saw a PSA 7 that's up for $265 right now. It's hard to find a comparable price because there hasn't been a PSA 6 that's sold on there recently. In fact, there's not often PSA cards that sell from Rick Farrell in particular. As I kind of mentioned, there's only 74 of these and 128 higher. I don't know how many there are total of him, but that's kind of telling. So people keep these in their collections. So another kind of point when you're thinking about vintage card collectors, people keep these when they get them. They're not ones that are constantly moving in and out of the market and kind of chasing like the guy that's doing really well or the next guy that's going to get in the Hall of Fame. So the PSA 7 was for $265. I'd probably kind of venture to say that's probably somewhere in the $200 range. But so anyway, so maybe, I guess now I think about it, the Walsh probably went first before him, so I apologize for kind of messing that up. But there you got Rick Farrell. All right, so the next 2 I got here is the Haffey. The Haffey was the next one. And this is because of the set itself. 34 Goudey is just held in higher prestige. There's a PSA 2.5 selling now for $325. That's not what I paid for this necessarily, but you can kind of illustrate this card's probably now pushing somewhere between like a $250 to maybe $300 card. I couldn't find a comparable comp that's out there right now to tell me how much it actually goes for. But you know, this is a card, you know, that I was excited to pick up a year ago at the end of a card show. That was just like a random vintage card that was sitting on a modern card table that someone just needed to get out of his pocket because he said he just couldn't move it. And I took it in a heartbeat, and you know, it's appreciated, and it'll probably stay pretty stable. But that was number 2, and you know, the Chick Haffey had more cards than both the Farrell and the Walsh. And then finally, the card that's actually has the most value, has everything to do with who it is. So the 2001 Topps Gold set, there are going to be more shorter printed serial numbered cards of Albert Pujols. Even in Topps Chrome, I think the orange refractor, I think, has a lower print run than the 2001 Topps Gold. So why is this card going to be the most valuable? I haven't been able to find a recent comp since what I paid, but I'm going to say it's probably somewhere around like $650 as it is right now, just in a PSA 6. It's not necessarily what I paid, but I'm going to venture that's kind of what it is based on some recent sales of other PSA cards at a similar grade. So why is this? Well, it is an iconic image, obviously, because the 2001 Topps cards, people have been chasing those for Pujols pretty much since his rookie year. And the gold is really the only serial numbered parallel from the base set. It is the only one, and obviously 2002 was the second year where they had gold as well, being the only base parallel, which brings some scarcity to it. When you kind of think about current products right now where you have how many parallels are available of a particular player in a set, I don't even know. I mean, there's ones numbered all the way, obviously, to the gold, all the way down to a 1 of 1. That didn't exist in 2001. So there brings some scarcity here and demand for the card as a result of it. There's certainly, as I mentioned, going to be more highly coveted 2001 Topps cards of Albert Pujols. But because of some of those dynamics, this card is actually going to be worth more than some of the ones I just listed. So I did that as like an exercise, just kind of point out both a little bit of the volatility in the card market, number one, but like sometimes scarcity doesn't necessarily drive the card prices. Sometimes it's the player's name. Definitely is a big influencer of that. Obviously the particular set that you're purchasing has a lot to do with it. Obviously the 34 Goudey is a much more popular set than the Mecha double folders that I mentioned there. Even the 67 Topps High Series, this Rocky Colavito card, if it was a low series card, would be probably about 15 bucks. But it's not. It's in the high series, which has a lot to do with how prices go. So just when you get a moment, check out those videos. And if you're kind of getting into the vintage card market, just educate yourself on both the popularity of the player, the popularity of the set, and also the pop reports on some of the cards you're kind of going after before you actually start kind of jumping into it. Because not every card is kind of equal in some sense too as a result of it. Who would have thought potentially that a PSA 3, from 34 of Chikafi who's a probably comparable Hall of Famer to Rick Farrell, is going much more than a PSA 6. But you need to know these things if you're going to kind of jump into the market, because obviously if you just deviated to the grade, you're going to like, okay, I'm going to get the Rick Farrell, and I want to spend a little bit more for the Rick Farrell because it's a card that maybe has more long-term investment because it's a 6, right? And there's less maybe that are higher of this card. Well, there's more of this, but there's more people looking for this card. There's more people looking for this card, even really in any PSA grade, but potentially higher too, which drives the demand. So I hope this was kind of helpful, and hope it was kind of fun. It was kind of fun for me to put it together, and these things I was kind of marinating on all day as I was doing other things. And I hope to put some more videos out soon, but I hope you guys all enjoyed this, and have a great week.